Welcome back to Financial Therapy. It's not just about the money. I'm personal financial planner, columnist, and financial therapist Rick Kahler. Research tells us that 90% of all financial decisions are made emotionally, not logically. For nearly 4 decades, I've been helping people make better money decisions. So what makes my financial worldview different from most financial experts? I blend the nuts and bolts of financial advice with the emotions that drive making them. Good money decisions are not just about the money. So let's get started with today's episode. Welcome back to another episode. Today I'm going to speak on the emotional aspects of something I've never discussed on the podcast. Neither have I ever written a column on it. And I've been writing columns, oh man, for a long time, over 30 years. So this was kind of surprising to me. And it came from an email or something I got that caught my eye. And it's on personal bankruptcy. Now, as you're listening to this right now, you may be wanting to go, okay, next podcast. That doesn't affect me, and I hope it never will. Yet it's kind of surprising how many people it does affect. In the last 20 years, the lowest number ever to file for bankruptcy are 374,000 in 2022, and over 2 million filed in 2005. So I'm guessing maybe around a million people a year on average will file for bankruptcy. And while this is not something that happens to most of us, I tried to find stats on what the chances are for a person to file bankruptcy in their lifetime, and I just couldn't find them. But I will remind you, and I believe I addressed this in a podcast maybe, I don't know, over a year ago, that I personally have stared bankruptcy in the face 5 times. I can already remember 4 of them right now, myself. So it's something, of course, that I've had some experience with. And staring bankruptcy in the face doesn't mean that you necessarily have taken bankruptcy, but just becoming insolvent is a precursor to bankruptcy. And we'll talk about that in a minute. So I'll admit, while listening to a podcast on this isn't really scintillating, for some of you, it's going to really land, unfortunately, close at home. And for others of you, even though you personally may not be insolvent, may not take bankruptcy, the chances are you know somebody who is insolvent, who is suffering from all of the emotional fallout, much less the financial fallout of being insolvent and considering or either taking bankruptcy. So that's kind of what I want to get into today, and more from the aspect of the emotional toll. You can Google, what steps should I take if I'm looking at bankruptcy or I'm concerned, and it'll list several steps. You can Google the difference between Chapter 7 and Chapter 13, all of these technical aspects. But that's not what I really want to cover, though. That's kind of the easy part of bankruptcy, if you will, the really difficult part are the thoughts, feelings, and emotions around bankruptcy. So what are the top reasons that people file for bankruptcy? And from what I could find, the number one reason is a job loss. The loss of somebody's steady income in the period of time that it takes to try and replace that income. This is one of the reasons, of course, that financial planners can really emphasize the need of having an emergency reserve. And ideally one that covers 6 to 12 months of income. And it's something that I would guess very few people really have. The second largest reason in the United States are medical bills. And you know, when I read stats like this, I'm always curious if medical bills, what is the percentage, or what's the dividing between medical bills when somebody has insurance and medical bills when they don't? And I have to assume that in filing for bankruptcy that the majority of those that would be filing for bankruptcy because of medical bills are those that did not have or could not afford insurance, or at least told themselves they couldn't afford insurance. I'm not sure about that. I've never seen that stat, but it's one that I'm curious about. The third reason is an unaffordable mortgage. So just through all sorts of things that can happen, just having a house payment that is far more than what you can afford. Now, obviously, a job loss would exacerbate unaffordable mortgage debt. But this is assuming just you still have your job, but the mortgage has become unaffordable. Overspending is number 4, which includes, obviously, credit cards. And number 5 was really interesting to me. It's helping other family members with financial assistance. And I've run across this in my financial planning practice, where I've had clients in the past that were supporting, typically it's a parent supporting a child, but it can be the reverse of a child supporting a parent in their retirement. And I've done the calculations and in several cases have told my clients that if they continue at their current rate of support, that they will be bankrupt. So wow, is this fraught with emotion, right? You could say that involved with the supporting of a family member, that there's an element of enabling. It wouldn't necessarily be true in every case, but I'll bet it's a significant reason. So dealing with all of the emotions and the money scripts and financial trauma behind enabling is absolutely key in a case like this to financial well-being. I've got to have done a podcast on enabling, but I'll have to check. Maybe that will be the next one. I thought it was also interesting that one stat cited that student debt is rarely a reason for bankruptcy, only accounting for 0.1% of all bankruptcies. And then I also remember that a lot of student debt cannot be discharged by bankruptcy. So that may not be as surprising of a statistic as it looks like on the surface. So, again, I want to get into the emotional cost of insolvency and bankruptcy. So some of the feelings around insolvency and bankruptcy, and I say insolvency because insolvency has to happen before bankruptcy, right? So it's the precursor. And a lot of folks don't realize that they're insolvent. And I'll talk about this a little bit later, but common feelings are, there's many, all right? Depression. There's usually a lot of shame. And I would say guilt. Shame, remember, is something that is systemic. It's more like I inherently am a failure versus guilt, which is I made a lot of really bad decisions that have ended me in this place or ended up with me being in this place. And I'd like to point out that not every person that goes insolvent is because of making a really wrong or almost foreseeable wrong decision. I'm trying to think of, I can think of one of the reasons that I stared bankruptcy in the face. And as it turned out, we had some economic downturns in my city because we have an Air Force base here that puts undue influence on the local economy that weren't precisely foreseen. So that caused a lot of unforeseen issues where I was over-leveraged, as it turned out. So you could say, well, maybe that wasn't a good thing. And obviously it wasn't. And being leveraged is part of creating wealth through real estate. Now, you don't want to be over-leveraged. You don't want to owe 110% on a property, or even owing 90% can be a little risky. But I'm remembering now another situation I was in where we had made a loan against some farmland, and it was 1/3 of value. So let's just say the farmland was worth $1 million, and we made a loan of $333,000 against it. Well, by all rules of thumb, that's a pretty safe loan. And this was it was Iowa farmland. And Iowa farmland at this particular time, if my recall's right, was worth $9,000 an acre. Well, they had a complete disaster in the value of that farmland, and it fell 2/3. So farmland that was worth $9,000 an acre fell to $3,000 an acre. Well, that was a big deal. And all of a sudden, our loan that was 1/3 of value, that was very safe, became 100% of value. And the borrower, the farmer, couldn't make the payments on it. And we were scrambling because in the business we were in, we had borrowed short-term to buy long-term debt. That's a whole nother story, and we were in a real tough situation. So I kind of digressed there, but I guess I bring that out to say I am no stranger to the difficult emotions of facing financial issues, facing insolvency, and potentially facing bankruptcy. And according to stats that say the average person that's accumulated over $1 million has made 3.1 serious financial mistakes, I don't think it's all that uncommon. I've said this stat many, many times on the podcast, that the average person that accumulates under $1 million makes 1.6 mistakes. I think inherent in that is it does involve taking risk to build wealth. So I don't know if this is any solace to any of you who are facing this, that sometimes it's just kind of the luck of the draw that can play a part in financial issues. So in addition to what I mentioned, there's embarrassment, what will people think? There's grief, there's anxiety, huge amount of anxiety caused by financial issues like this. There can be hurt, depending on the circumstances around it, just a hopelessness, a lot of insecurity, just going numb, which I really relate to in the past. A person can become really apathetic, just overwhelmed. And this is just a few. As I was looking at a list of feelings, there's scores of feelings that can come up around financial insolvency. And all of these emotions can severely impact a person's career choices, clarity of thinking, relationships. If you're married, it can lead to the dissolution of the marriage. Of course, impact your physical health, and without saying your mental health. So it's really costly. It's costly beyond the dollars and cents. And it's something to take very, very seriously and be proactive with, because the ripple effect of insolvency and bankruptcy is significant. And that's why it's important to be considering this, even though you may not be insolvent or facing bankruptcy. Certainly somebody you know or will know. So that person that does file for bankruptcy can often harbor thoughts that they've let themselves down, they've let their family down, they've let their friends down. You can see how suicide is often tied to a financial situation like insolvency and bankruptcy. The person feels like a failure. They often feel like they're 100% responsible for their circumstances, and I've kind of addressed that while there can be probably some culpability, personal culpability in every insolvency situation, it might amount to 10% of the reasons, right? It's not necessarily always 100%. Of course, there's a lot of anxiety about a person's financial future, their ability to get credit in the future, to qualify, to even rent a place, or to get insurance, the ability to pay their bills, to get a job, and just the ability to eventually rebuild their credit. So all of this can leave someone feeling really helpless, hopeless, and overwhelmed. And even to the point that they have trouble sleeping, they have trouble eating, they have trouble concentrating. So this is big stuff. So what can a person do? I think the first thing a person can do is to step out of denial or delusion that you're having serious financial issues. And the first thing is to recognize if you are technically insolvent. Now, insolvent means that if you sold everything you owned and took the sale proceeds, they would not be enough to pay off your debts. And I was interested in my research for this. There was a gentleman by the name of David Steen. He hosts a podcast called Money for the Rest of Us. He had a segment on May 27th, 2021, where he went through a whole litany of some reports that say 40 to 60% of Americans are insolvent, and he debunked those. And in his podcast, he said, according to surveys that he has seen, the Congressional Budget Office, CBO, of Congress, reports that 25% of Americans are technically insolvent. Now, that doesn't mean they filed for bankruptcy. That just means their debts are more than their net worth. I was going to say 15% because in the past I had seen a 15% figure, and I've written about it and reported it, and I no longer could find the site for that. And I tried to find the site here. He had the data, but you had to subscribe to his podcast to get it. And I just wasn't interested in that. That's why I'm citing him. So 25% is still, seems pretty high to me, but not unbelievable at all. I mean, wow. And when you consider the fact that somewhere between 70 and 80% of Americans, and we've seen this stat over and over and over, would have to sell something to come up with $1,000, sell or borrow, then the fact that if that's 70 to 80%, the fact that 25% of us are technically insolvent isn't surprising. So that's the first thing to really grapple with, is do the numbers. Try to muster the courage to take a hard look at your financial situation. Some of you listening to this have no clue that you're insolvent. It hasn't even occurred to you that you may be insolvent. So do that. Do that accounting and see if that's your situation. You probably know something's a little wrong because you struggle to make your monthly debt payments. So even if the shame of filing for bankruptcy is so overwhelming that it's just not an emotional option. I've talked with people that have said that it's against my ethics, it's against my morals, I will not file for bankruptcy. So that's an honorable position, right? Because you're saying, I want to fulfill my promises. And that's very honorable. And it's really important that a person takes a look and determines if they are insolvent, because it's important to take some steps early before a person is just almost absolutely forced to take bankruptcy. And so the first thing to do is to come to terms with those money scripts, those deeply rooted money scripts that you have around bankruptcy and its consequences. we all know that money scripts are partial truths. So I get some help in exploring those money scripts, those beliefs. When did they first appear in your system? Is there more information that could be helpful to the part of you that believes what it believes around bankruptcy? And understand the circumstances that they came to be. I can think of financial therapy clients I've worked with who spend every dollar that they get. They don't overspend. They just spend every dollar they get. And we've tied it back to the bankruptcy of parents. The fact that all their money, all their savings as a kid disappeared more than once, possibly. And they learned money isn't going to stay around. Now, none of these people that I can think are even looking at bankruptcy or insolvency, but it is how bankruptcy affected them and they weren't even aware of it. So start to take a look at those messages, a look at those money scripts, and understand that there's sources available to help you sort all of this out. The first step is to get into credit counseling. I'm on the board of our local consumer credit counseling service. And you've got to get approved credit counseling even to file bankruptcy. So this can be super helpful because it can give you information that you didn't even know, correct some misunderstandings that you didn't even know, to help you climb out of the insolvency. Another thing that can be very helpful is engaging a therapist, especially a financial therapist, and getting that emotional support and doing the emotional work around this. Ultimately, if your path does lead to filing bankruptcy, bankruptcy was put in place to help a person remove some of the overwhelming financial pressure that they're facing. It can free up income so that you can pay your rent, so you can pay your mortgage and utilities and other basic necessities. So the intention of bankruptcy was to help a person have a fresh start if they're really overwhelmed by debt. So whether you are even considering filing for bankruptcy or not, I would really urge you to deal with insolvency, because if we climb out of our denial, the fear of looking at that, and deal with those really wounded and vulnerable parts of us, and the shame and everything that may be associated with that, can really put us on the track to avoid bankruptcy. So I want to leave you with that. It's really important to remember that with time and effort, you can rebuild your financial and emotional future. So thanks for joining me, and I look forward to being with you next week. Thanks for joining me, Rick Kahler, for another episode of Financial Therapy. It's not just about the money. This is where I combine the nuts and bolts of financial advice with the emotions that drive making them. Remember, every financial behavior, whether it appears illogical to you or others, makes perfect sense when we understand the underlying beliefs, feelings, and thoughts. Sign up for my weekly blog at financialawakenings.com. I hope you'll join me again for our next episode.